Hi, everyone. So this is your fearless professor, about ready to give you your final lecture for the semester. Um, if you were to take a clay class in person, one of the things that you do with clay to finish it off after you've done the first firing, then the thing you do next is glaze it. Glazing is for sculpture or for pottery, really. What it is it's a hotter firing. What you do is you put a substance that is mostly glass. It's in a liquid form. You dip it or spray it or paint it on, and then you fire it again into a hotter temperature, and this glass melts, and it gives it a glass finish, which is shiny. It can be matte also, but it's a very hard finish, and it's used for pottery so that food doesn't stick to it. It's an aesthetic look. It looks pretty, and lasts forever, and all that. So glazing is something that you would do with ceramics. Now with sculpture, it doesn't have to be, it can, the glaze and make it look nice. Yeah. And oftentimes I'll glaze sculpture. People glaze sculpture. They'll do some kind of finish on it for sure. That's ceramic that you fire again, and it melts it on. But it's not essential. Sculpture doesn't need to have glass on the outside of it. Anything can be on the outside of it. But if we were in a face-to-face instruction situation where we had a studio and we had the kilns and we would do a lot of firings, which we will once we get back to face-to-face. So I hope you do take another ceramics course so you get that experience, is that we do a lot of glaze firing. So you would do glaze. I always, though, fit in a non-glazing finish assignment also, which we will do here. You'll need to listen to this whole talk for a couple of different reasons. One is that I want you to know about glazing, and I want you to know the history of it, and I want you to know about it because it's useful information. This is a clay class, so you should know it. Second of all is that I will give the assignment within this lecture. And I might even give a quiz on this lecture because I think it's interesting. As part of this field, it is information you ought to know. So with that in mind, let me talk a little bit about glaze. But in order to talk about glaze, I want to back up a little bit and talk to you a little bit about clay. Again, just as a review, one of the first lectures I gave was what clay is. So let me share screen and bring up whiteboard, iPad. It's not showing me my computer. I wonder why that is. Let me open up something here and see if that helps. No. So let's go. Let me go back here. There we go. Okay. So in review, clay is granite. 3/4 of the world is, the Earth's mantle is granite. Another name for granite is feldspathic rock. Feldspathic rock erodes through glaciers moving, etc. And it turns into a feldspar. The chemicals in the feldspar are silica and alumina, and the minerals, sodium and potassium. So it further erodes further on downstream, and the mineral gets washed out. So you're left with this silica and alumina, which is clay. Now, if you remember, we add these two primary clay and secondary clay to make a good clay body. It has both plasticity and a good body. It's strong. So we need both of those in there. It has to be workable and it has to be strong. But in order for it to fire and vitrify, for the glass, the silica in it to melt, we need to lower the melting point because it's too hot. It requires too much heat to melt the silica. So what we do is we add a feldspar back in. It has all three of these because sodium and or potassium, they both act as a flux to silica to lower the melting point of it. Otherwise, it's too refractory. It won't melt. So we add a flux, lowers the melting point, okay? So we have silica and alumina. Alumina is a clay, silica is glass, okay? Then we add something to lower that melting point to make it start so it's waterproof and stronger. And that way it won't ever erode again. So that's just a basic review. I hope that makes sense and you kind of remember that. Now, clay is glass. I'm sorry, glaze is, my dog wants to go out the side of the door and he's distracting me. Glaze is glass, and we want glass to melt on the surface of our clay. Now, if you just tried to melt, let's say you had silica in a powder, you added water to it and painted that on. That silica, and if you had, well, if you got it to melt, it would not stick to the pot. It would fall off or flake off, and it wouldn't stick. So you need a material to make glass stick to clay. Can you think what that might be? Well, it's clay. You add clay to silica, to glass, to make it stick to the clay. If you were doing enameling, where you're trying to make glass stick to metal, what do you think you might add to the glass? Well, you add metal. So in order to have a good glaze, we need the silica, the glass, which is what we want to melt. And then we need a little clay in there so that the clay will, so that the glass will stick to the clay. But now we have the problem again of the glass melting at a low enough temperature to be practical, to have a low enough heat to be able, we don't want it going to 4,000 degrees in a kiln. It's just too much energy to do that. So we add a flux. Well, we had a couple up here in the feldspar. We had the potassium, sodium. Those are both fluxes. So we could add that in. Well, now I've got glass, which is silica, and I have the aluminum, which is clay, and then which is what makes the glass stick to the clay. And then I've got my God, it looks like a feldspar. In other words, and I told you that feldspar is, is granite, right? It's decomposing granite, like the whole mountain ranges around here. The San Gabriels, the San Bernardino Mountains are all a big pile of feldspar. It's like a big pile of glaze material because it has silica, it has alumina, and it has the mineral, which is what a glaze is. However, it's in a really bad balance. If you were to take one of your sculptures or anything when it was still kind of, a little bit wet, and you rolled it in a DG, decomposed granite path that they're all around campus and all around Southern California, or just roll it in feldspar, what would happen is that would turn into sort of like pus pockets. It would be a glaze, but it would look really ugly. And that's because the silica, the alumina, and the minerals or the flux are in a wrong proportion. That's all. There's just not enough mineral to melt it into a more of a glass surface. So it goes into like these little pockets of little marbleized glass. So really what we need to do is up the mineral, the flux, to lower the melting point of the glass. If you were taking a glaze chemistry class or a more advanced class from me, what I would do is I would have you start with a feldspar, see what that looks like when you add water and dip a test tile into it and see what it looks like. And then I'd start having you add percentages of a flux, in this case, sodium and potassium, because the feldspar is already on its way to being, it's already on its way to being a glaze. And remember, we add a feldspar to a clay body, right, to primary, secondary clay, when they add a feldspar to get these minerals in there to melt the clay so it's waterproof. Same thing with the glaze now. We have a feldspar and I'm adding more to it. So that's a nice base for a glaze, and then add more flux. I can go to another page now that shows you a little bit more, because there's more than those two kinds of fluxes, potassium and sodium. And remember, sodium is like table salt, right? It's salt. Potassium, find it in bananas. You find it it's a supplement. You find it in, I said bananas. I'm not sure if they use potassium in batteries. I'm not sure. But anyway, so let me stop sharing here and get another thing up. Close this one. This is more about glaze itself. And I'm going to share screen. Hope you're following along. I'm just trying to show you the similarity of clay and glaze. They're very similar. Okay. Get this over. Oops, can I move this over? There we go. All righty. So let's review this now. A glaze has three parts to it, and they're just like in a feldspar. There's the glass, which is what we want to melt. We have what makes it stick to the clay, which is clay itself, alumina, right? And then we have the flux. I talked about sodium and potassium, but here are some other ones that work at different temperatures. And a lot of these can work at all of these temperatures. Zinc is a good one for all temperatures, but a lot of these are, but lead is particularly good for low temperatures. So anyway, all these things in this category can lower the melting point of glass. Okay. And now the reason why I have these other materials in with the melt is because it's arranged chemically. So there's 2 oxygen. Well, tin also has 2 oxygen. Zirconium, which is a pacifier, makes it so you can't see through the glaze. It also has 2 oxygen. Titanium has 2 oxygen. So anyway, that's the reason why they're here. Boron is actually a flux, the most powerful flux besides lead, used for low fire stuff. It's here because it has 3 oxygen, just like the alumina does. And then these all have just 1 oxygen, but they're all in the, these are all fluxes. And so is the boron, just so you know. So anyway, if I wanted my glaze to be less runny and to get more matte, what would you think I'd do? Well, to the feldspar, I would add a little bit more. Well, the feldspar is already not runny, but if I wanted to, let's say I had it too runny, I would add more alumina to it. I would add more clay in a certain form, like Edgar's plastic kaolin. Don't worry about that, but I'd add more clay. If I wanted it to be more runny, I'd add more flux. Okay, so that's really the way or I'd back off on the alumina. That's basically the way this works. So you can kind of play with it, actually. If you start with a feldspar, you could play with it. You could make it less runny, more runny by how much flux or how much clay you add. Okay, so it's kind of easy to think of it that way. Lead, well, you know what lead is? It's a metal. These are actually all metals. Lead is used for shields to keep radiation out. Yeah, it's also used. I think it's used in batteries. It used to be used in paint. Zinc. You've heard of zinc in batteries for sure. Sodium, salt, potassium, bananas, lithium. It's interesting. Lithium is really great when you add colorants, like blue colorant to it. It makes great blues, really dynamic blues. And lithium is also used in depression medicine, which I like that connection of depression and, the blues. Yeah. Barium, boy, they use barium. If you drink it when they want to take X-rays of your body, it's like that pink, turns pink inside and they can follow your digestion or in your blood or something when they're doing X-rays and stuff. So barium is really wild. Calcium, have it in milk. Magnesium, it's used as a supplement. It's also used in fireworks. It burns really hot and bright. Strontium, I'm not sure about that one, but a lot of these things, some of these are very basic elements in our body that we need. And others, but they're very connected to all of our elements in our body. Okay, so I just wanted to show you that it's not just some chemical that's foreign to us; it's actually part of us. The way they're prepared for ceramics, these things are poisonous, so you don't want to eat them. They're not supplements when they get in a ceramic studio, but they are in our bodies, which is interesting because if someone were to cremate me, I'd probably be a really good glaze. I mean, with the leftover, the ashes would be a really good glaze because it'd have all this stuff. It'd also have silica in it and probably have alumina in it as well. So it's a little bit interesting that way. So now that you know the properties of glazes, and the main thing is the silica, you're melting that. You use flux to lower the melting point of that. And this alumina is clay and what makes it stick to a clay. Okay, so those are 3 properties of glazes. Now that I've shown you that, I can do a little PowerPoint. Let me stop sharing. I can do a PowerPoint on historical glazes. Really briefly, there's 4 different kinds of historical glazes. And let me open this up. And then I'm going to share screen. historical glazes. And let me get this full screen here. Now, glazes were kind of discovered by accident, just like about everything else. You know, you think about it, the Egyptians came up with the first, let me go ahead and go that first. The Egyptians came up with the first glazes. And if you think about it, so let's say you're near the coast here. Let's say you have pots that you want to fire and get them, to turn waterproof. Well, anywhere along here, all this water here, is it regular water? No, it's salt water. So this water has a lot of sodium in it. So this sand has a lot of sodium. So they dig a hole, put the pots in, they try to, and the clay body is made from this too. So it probably has salt and silica and clay in it. And it becomes, the pots themselves became self-glazing. You may have heard of Egyptian paste, and it's a self-glazing clay body that we still use. People use the self-glazing clay body to make beads and other kinds of jewelry. There's the landscape, a lot of sand, which is silica. The salt is in there, and then the clay. So that's what the Egyptian paste looks like. It's quite lovely. So people make jewelry out of that. The next people to find, and that's pretty low fire because that salt is so heavy that it fires at a pretty low temperature. The next people to find a low fire glaze were the Babylonians. The Babylonians discovered lead. Now, lead is a very powerful melter. It's a very powerful flux for melting glaze, for the glass. And it actually has, if you were to melt lead with silica, it would normally it would, like a flux with silica will turn just clear glass, but there's actually a yellow cast to lead. So anything that you put with it has sort of this richness and this mellowness. So you get blood, deep blood reds, and really, really dark blues. They're just beautiful. So very, very saturated colors. The problem with lead is that it can leach out and it's very poisonous. Mexican pottery actually used to have a lot of lead in it. I'm not sure, they probably have an equivalency of the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, has probably outlawed the use of lead in glazes because it does leach out and you can get lead poisoning. A lot of Mexican pottery used to have lead in it, and not so much now. But anyway, lead poisoning is really nasty, and a lot of people got lead poisoning back in those times. But lead, nevertheless, is very beautiful, and it's useful now for sculpture. I mean, because you're not going to eat off it, so it has this beautiful richness to it, and it melts very low at very low temperatures. The way we use lead in a safer way, if you can follow along with this, just bear with me for a second. The way they use lead so it's safer, so it's not just raw lead, is that they'll melt it with glass and some alumina, and then they'll pulverize that glass. Once it's melted, they'll pulverize it into a powder. It's calcined, which means it's been fired and then pulverized up again. The name for this, those three elements, so you got the lead, you got your glass, and you have your clay, right? All three, just a glaze in there. It's like a feldspar, has all three things, yeah? And they call that, where it's fired and then pulverized, they call it a frit. So like a man-made feldspar or a man-made glaze, but they pulverize it back up into a powder, add water, and it's a glaze. And it's much safer to use than raw lead. You still have to be careful, but it's not quite as dangerous in terms of using. In terms of it putting on a pottery and eating out of it, it's still dangerous. So you wouldn't want to do that. But anyway, the Babylonians came up with that. Again, the deep, rich colors. The Chinese were the first ones to come up with higher fire kilns. And the way they did this is they built these, they're called onigami kilns. They're built up a hillside, because what direction does heat like to flow? Uphill. So what they do is they put their chamber, the wood, where they burn the wood, they'll put it at the bottom of the hill, so it flows up, the heat flows up into the kiln, up to the hill. The kiln is often made of dirt. These are refractory bricks, meaning they don't melt easy. They hold heat well, and they don't melt. And anyway, they also hold the heat in really well. Also, what you need to have fire burn, you probably all know this, is air. If you were to suffocate a fire, that's how you put it out. So they had holes in the top of the kilns or on the sides to regulate how much air is let into the kiln, so they could make it burn hotter, or they can make it, what happens with when you start starving a kiln that is really, let's say a kiln gets up like to 2,300 degrees, that's really hot. It's starting to suck oxygen. It really wants to burn. You know, it really is, it's like an animal. So if you starve that fire of oxygen, it's not going to just snuff out. Well, if you totally snuff it, if you totally block it of oxygen, it will. But what you do is you let enough in so it still wants to burn. What it's going to do is it's going to rob oxygen from all the clay body ingredients and all the glaze ingredients. If you remember from that sheet I showed you of chemicals, every one of them had oxygen at the end, either one molecule of oxygen or 2 or 3 molecules of oxygen. So it robs all those chemicals of oxygen, and that's how it burns, and it creates changes in color by doing that. It's called reduction. You reduce the oxygen. Anyway, they were able to get the higher temperatures. Interesting happened. You have the wood at the bottom here. It's burning. Wood turns into what? After it burns, it turns into ash. That ash is sucked up into the kiln and falls on the pots and sort of kisses them and makes these beautiful ash markings on them. So sort of by accident, they found a whole family of glazes that are ash glazes. And they would actually make glazes out of the ash. So they would burn wood, take the ash, add more silica and clay to it. Actually, you could just add clay to it, really, and you have yourself a really amazing glaze. And I'm going to show you some examples of that. The interesting thing, before I show you, the interesting thing about ash is that let's say if I did burned oak wood, that glaze effect would look different than like cherry wood, or different than pine wood ash would look. The other interesting thing is if I burned the wood, if I cut the wood, let's say in the springtime and burned it, I'd have a certain kind of ash. If I did it in the fall and burned it, it would be a different kind of ash, because the tree is wicking different kinds of minerals, sucking up different kinds of minerals at different parts of the year. So you get this variation even among the same material from being harvested at different times of the year. So you get a lot of variation depending on the material you're using and the time you harvest it. So ash glazes, this is really kind of typical of a wood firing where things sort of fall on the pot and make these sort of flares that are really beautiful. Ash glaze itself has these sort of veins in it. It can be very runny, and it can run right off the pot. So you times have to add more clay to it so it's more sticky and then won't run. And you can get it very, very dry. But normally it runs like this and had this sort of veiny look, which is very, very typical of ash glazes. So ash glazes are one of the first families of glazes they discovered just by firing in wood kilns that with the ash flowing up to the kiln. You know, they did this for centuries. So there's many, many ash glazes. This is another very historical glaze. By the way, I'm showing these historical glazes because all of our contemporary glazes are riffs on these historical glazes. So they're not like historical, we don't use them anymore. We still use all of them, and we've just done improvements on them. Now, this is a celadon glaze. There are thousands of celadons. There are blue-green celadons. There are pale green celadons. It's like jade. You know, there are gray celadons. There are crackly celadons. There are clear celadons. And one thing I didn't tell you on that glaze chart, I showed you all the materials in that glaze chart that I'm not going to go back to it now, but the chemicals makes your glaze either clear or opaque along that axis and shiny to matte along that axis. We didn't really talk about color there. Color is added as with other metals. The main colorants that we have are iron oxide, just iron. You think of iron, it's red and brown, right? When it rusts like that. There's copper, which is green. If you think of the Statue of Liberty, when copper oxidizes, it turns green. We have chrome. These are all metals. We have cobalt, which is blue, and it's one of the most powerful of all the coloring metals. cobalt. And then there's rutile, which has iron and tin in it, and it's much more sort of like beige looking. Now, I wish I could draw on a board here, and I don't have that, but it's like, it would be clear to you. But this is a celadon. The celadons are made, this is only fired in reduction that you get this color. And what they do, remember, I told you that they starve the kiln of oxygen and it makes the colors turn. So if you were to do a celadon glaze in a electric firing, which doesn't require oxygen, it's just like a big toaster oven, radiant heat, celadon would turn like a scratchy yellowish brown. And that's because the way you get this green color is with a trace amount of iron. Remember, iron turns brown. It can turn yellow in smaller amounts in the oxidation. In reduction, it turns this beautiful jade green because of the reduction, this chemical reaction to the fire. So 1% iron, 2% iron, you can add that in there and make your own celadon. You know, you add your feldspar, add a little more flux, and then you add like 1 or 2% iron. Voila, you got celadons. Again, there's thousands of them. This is a very popular historical glaze. Anyway, there you go. The next very popular glaze, that's a reduction, and these are all Chinese-based reduction glazes. This is a red glaze, and this is made, remember I told you the copper is green, like on the Statue of Liberty? Well, if you fire it in reduction, and oftentimes a little bit of tin in it too, but don't worry about that. This is a copper red. Copper turns red. If I fired this in an electric kiln rather than a reduction, like a gas kiln, it would turn green, almost like a celadon. Not quite as pretty though. Anyway, so copper reds, there's hundreds of copper reds. They turn purpley, they can be darker and richer. They can go sort of liver color, which is kind of ugly. But anyway, there's many different kinds of copper reds. And then the last of the historical glazes I want to talk to you about are the iron saturates. Now, you remember, if I used it in a reduction firing, where I starve the kiln of a little oxygen, if I add trace amounts of iron, it turns into celadon. If I add higher amounts of iron, from like 5% on up to 10%, you start getting these many different kinds of famous iron saturates. You have your Ohata hotkeys, you've got persimmons, and boy, I'm trying to lose just the regular iron saturates. Temoku glazes. This is the Temoku glaze, so it can go from black to brown, breaks over the edges. But anyway, you can get some olive greens also with heavier iron. So you can get a lot of variation with different amounts of iron. But the iron saturates is when you use higher amounts of iron, then they turn dark brown like this. Okay, so again, the 4 historical glazes then are ash glazes, celadons, copper reds, iron saturates. And that pretty much tells you about glazing. Now, we don't have glaze. We're not going to do a glaze firing this semester since we're online and we don't have a studio. So I'm very sorry you don't get that experience. But this is sculpture. And again, sculpture doesn't need to have glazes on it. I have this here. I'm going to stop sharing now. I'm going to come back to this though, so I will share it again in a second. This has glaze right here. You can see it's nice and shiny, but these are just underglazes. It's just clay with colorant in it, slips and underglazes. Yeah, so that was that, but that was fired on. There's one here I have. This one here has a glaze. You can see it's shiny. This is a slip. This is an underglaze that I put on after bisque firing. But right here, folks, that's acrylic paint. You don't fire on acrylic paint. You paint it on and you leave it. It's like a plastic coating. It would burn off in a kiln. So since we don't have kilns available for firing, and it's a sculpture, so it doesn't need to be, don't need to have glass on it. It doesn't have to even be waterproof. Some people don't fire their sculptures at all as part of their process. If you saw Nicole Seidler's talk, she doesn't fire much of her work. And a lot of it stays raw clay on purpose. So anyway, but we have, for this semester, I'm going to have you do a room temperature glaze, meaning you're probably in your pot or one of your big sculptures that's already been fired. I'm hoping you have that. If you didn't get to fire one of your big ones, you can still do something to it, even though it's raw clay, but you got to be very careful not to break it because it's very fragile. Now there's anything goes. Anything goes with room temperature glaze. It means you can paint it with acrylic. You can paint it with tempera paint. You can paint it with house paint. You can drizzle tar over it. You can, if you had a big, huge vat, you could soak it in tea leaves, right? You could put it in the ocean for, if it was fired, for 6 months and let it grow barnacles. You could, one woman, I think I might have mentioned this, she made a muscle car for her final project. And the muscle car is a really hyper masculine thing. And she painted it with makeup and then had hair extensions coming out of the exhaust pipe. So it's this hyper masculine object with hyper feminine surface to it, which I thought was a wonderful contrast, very smart. So anything can work. You can even put, I'm going to show you about 3 examples. You can put stuff on it. You can flock it, like Christmas tree flocking. You can spray it with flocking, or you can paint something on it and put flocking on it. You can put gold leaf on it if you know how to do that. You can put metallic. They make metallic paints. You can paint on like an iron thing. It turns gray, and then they put it's almost like putting Coca-Cola on it, but they have a thing on there that makes it rust out and turns into rust. So you can do that. You can do anything that colors it. Okay. So your assignment for the finals, and you'll have to just turn it in as a picture, and you've got to get it in by finals, which is for Monday class, it's on the 14th. For Tuesday class, it's on the 15th. But you can turn in either those 2 days. But I need those 2 days. There's no lateness on this project. So you've got to get it done this week. Okay. You can go to Michael's and find all kinds of stuff, glitter glue, whatever. It could be wild. It could, I would like it kind of be appropriate for the form if possible, but go for it. So let me show you some examples here. Let me go back to I'm going to share a screen, go back to that PowerPoint. You should be there. And then, no, it's not there. Sorry. It's 3 ones I have. It's 3 other ones that I have on the, now that. Sorry. There we go. And share screen. Here we go. I make this bigger so you can see it better. So you can see with this person, I love this on her on the soft slab project. She put, it almost looks like a silly string, but she should put blue rivers. She put these trees, glued trees on, going all different directions, and then she painted with a little bit of with paint also, just touching here and there. So it's quite beautiful. And to get like a background color, you could paint it with watercolor, unless your clay has not been fired. Can't do watercolor. Maybe not even tempera paint, I'm not sure. But anyway, so you can glue things on it. But so she made this whole big sort of natural forest and kind of crazy trees growing upside down with a cave inside the cave. I thought it was pretty wonderful. This next person did tempera paints and did all these layers, which I think are really beautiful. Okay. And this next person just, I think, laid things on it, like crystals and, plastic jewelry and stuff. And really, it's really quite amazing. Maybe I can make it bigger here. You can see it more. So she really went to town and glued these things on, which is quite lovely. It looks like ice, doesn't it? So this gives you ideas. So I want you to kind of go to town on this. Hopefully you have one of your big sculptures. Now, if you don't have your big sculptures, they all fell apart or blew up or they broke, you'll have to do maybe a couple of the smaller ones or maybe 3 of them to kind of qualify for this, But I hope you can do one of your big ones. And then once you've decorated however you're going to do it with this room temperature glaze, and again, anything goes, right? You can even smear food on it. I mean, you can do whatever. You got to take pictures of it. You have to take it from different angles so I can see different sides, please. Okay, and make it so I can really see it. So take care of your photos. This is your final project, so treat it that way. Okay, and And I think that's about it. So I'm not going to write down an assignment because I want you to watch. I wanted you to watch this whole presentation. So that's the assignment. Either one of your big ones or three of your smaller ones, you need to decorate them. You can do two of your smaller ones if you really go to town. Like I've seen some people already paint some of their stuff and they really went to town on it, and that looks great. So just make it a final project. I'll be loose in terms of numbers and stuff like that, if that makes sense. Shoot me an email if you have questions. All righty, have fun, and I look forward to seeing your final projects. And I don't know if I'll be talking to you again. I'm going to show up. I'm going to show up for finals. Finals. That's right. I'll put that in an announcement. I think finals normally is set for the morning classes on Monday and Tuesday at 11:30, and the afternoon class on Tuesday, Thursday, or on Monday, Wednesday, sorry, is at 2:15. I think that's the way it works. So I'll write in the announcement. I'll be showing up that time. But basically, I'm just going to be, if we were in the studio, we'd have a potluck. Unfortunately, we're not in the studio, so no pizza. You can make your own pizza. But it'd be just a time to look at your stuff, and it'd be cleaning up your lockers and all that. So I'm going to show up. You don't have to show up, but we could sit around and chat if you'd like. And the main thing is to turn in your pictures for finals, and that's all I have. Okay. Good luck. Have fun. Bye-bye.